Welcome to the Fun Astrology and Merriman Market Analyst Saturday Financial Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller. Thanks for joining us. This is the free weekly newsletter that's published every weekend on the website MMAcycles.com by financial analyst and renowned astrologer Ray Merriman. And I have to say that this newsletter, especially the last section, may be one of the most important that has been written in quite some time. If you're interested in where the positives are in things going on right now, stay with it. It'll be at the end. We are reviewing the week past, and then this is written for the week of June 30th, beginning Monday, for a shortened trading week because of the July 4th Independence Day holiday. Getting us started, a quote from Friday's Wall Street Journal. The S&P 500 on Friday notched its first new high since February, capping a dizzying 24% rally from the depths of April's tariff-induced sell-off. The wild 89 trading days in between put the broad U.S. stock market on track for its swiftest recovery back to a record close after a decline of at least 15%, according to Dow Jones market data. Stocks have climbed in recent sessions after the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran sent oil prices lower and fueled optimism that the Middle East could avoid a prolonged conflict. Continued trade negotiations between the U.S. and trading partners have also lifted investors' spirits ahead of the looming deadline for tariff hikes. Now, Ray's comments for the week past, he says time will tell. It always does. But the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities by Israel and the U.S. over the past 2 weeks, and especially on June 22nd, may be the critical turning point in the age of terrorism that began in earnest on September 11, 2001. Global stock markets responded favorably to this bold act. In Asia and the Pacific Rim, the indices of China, Hong Kong, Japan, and India all rallied to multi-month highs last week. Australia's ASX got within 35 points of doing the same, all closed well for the week. In Europe, it was a little more complicated. Most were down early in the week and rallied after the bombing of Iran's nuclear sites. The exception was the Zurich SMI, which bottomed on June 23rd, but had an anemic rally afterwards. The performance was much more animated in the U.S., where the S&P and NASDAQ soared to new all-time highs on Friday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had a powerful rally into the end of the week, reaching a high of 42,966 on Friday. But this was still off from the all-time high of $45,073 recorded on December 4th, 2024. Failure to attain a new all-time high leaves the U.S. stock market open to a case of intermarket bearish divergence as we head into the July 4th shortened holiday week, with Venus and Uranus both due to ingress into Gemini July 4th to 7th. Whenever Uranus is highlighted, there is an increased risk of a sudden reversal or an explosive breakout to new highs in several financial markets. Furthermore, the sign of Gemini can be almost as volatile as Uranus when prominent. Expect impressive fireworks both literally and in terms of financial markets. Commodities took the exact opposite direction from equities last week. Gold fell to its lowest level in 5 weeks and now is down over $200 from its all-time high of April 22nd. Silver also buckled, dropping to a low of $35.20 last week, just 1 week after posting its highest level in 13 years the week before at $37.24. Shock and awe were especially present in crude oil, which shot up to $78.30 on Monday, June 23rd, only to immediately fall back to $64 1 day later. Bitcoin and Ethereum followed the stock market higher last week, following probable primary cycle lows the prior week. If correct, new all-time highs in Bitcoin are shortly ahead. Now, the short-term geocosmics. A quote from last Sunday's Wall Street Journal editorial board. President Trump's decision to strike Iran's 3 most significant nuclear sites on Saturday helped rid the world of a grave nuclear threat and was a large step toward restoring U.S. deterrence. It also creates an opportunity for a more peaceful Middle East, if the nations of the region will seize it." End quote. I might just add that what you're going to hear in this section is a discussion about these upcoming July retrogrades being possible shift points in market trends. And if you'll recall from the forecast books, and hopefully you've ordered yours, but there's still half the year left if you haven't, Ray talks about the price patterns of market cycles. Obviously, markets cycle up and they cycle back down. But when you have extreme price movement like we had this week, and you throw in some retrogrades like you're going to hear about, the geocosmic events, the retrogrades, often correlate to price changes in the markets. And that's what he's talking about in this section. Quoting Ray, "We are leaving the central time band of the most powerful geocosmic signatures of the year. However, that doesn't mean that chaotic financial markets or disruptive geopolitical events have ended. As covered in our recent mid-year financial markets webinar on June 15th, there are a series of secondary, quote, earthquakes still ahead through the end of this year. June 9 through 27 was just the center of the hurricane. Another major geocosmic disruption arrangement is setting up July 4th through the 18th. It starts with Venus, of money, conjoining Uranus, disruption, as both planets enter the changeable sign of Gemini between July 4th and 17th. At the same time, Neptune will be the first of 3 planets turning retrograde on July 4th, followed by Saturn July 13th and Mercury July 18th. Neptune and Saturn turning retrograde are powerful level 1 reversal signatures with the highest correlation to primary market cycles. Also, when 2 or more planets change directions in a short time frame, primary cycles in several financial markets often culminate. Neptune turning retrograde has a correlation to rallies in gold shortly afterwards, which will be interesting in this case as gold is plummeting toward its 31 1/3 month cycle low at the same time. Neptune also has rulership over crude oil, which has been extremely volatile in the past week. Saturn retrograde is another important reversal signature within an orb of 9 trading days, and often only 4 trading days. Any market making a high or low in this period is a candidate for a major reversal, as worries about the future tend to increase. Those anxieties are apt to be further exaggerated with Mercury turning retrograde in mid-Leo on July 18th, which starts a 3-week period when decision-making tends to be made in haste before all the facts and possible outcomes are considered. None of this appears to represent a time of calm and steady markets or world leadership. To the contrary, we may see events, decisions, and reactions to those decisions set off another period of retrograde chaos. It is crucial to consider that this period also coincides with President Trump's deadline to inform other nations what their tariff fees will be to trade with the United States. This could be a time of turmoil and disappointment. Neptune, Saturn, and Mercury are all turning retrograde, as hopes for a jubilant relief end with a thud. We are now well past the Sun conjunct Jupiter time for celebration, was June 24th. Equity markets are already in the mature stage of their primary cycle, and intermarket bearish divergence triggers are setting up if the Dow Jones Industrial Average does not rally to a new all-time high prior to or during this retrograde headwind. These geocosmic signatures could therefore be a recipe for another sharp decline via disappointing economic or political announcements, though probably not leading to a sell-off below the lows of April 7th. Now, some long-term thoughts and opinion. A quote from David Bowie, The Moonage Daydream from 2022. At the turn of the 20th century, Friedrich Nietzsche proclaimed that God was dead and that man had killed him. This created an arrogance within man that he himself was God. But as God, all he could seem to do was produce disaster. This led to a terrifying confusion. For if we could not take the place of God, how could we fill the space we had created within ourselves? And then from BBC News on June 25th, Trump said at a NATO summit in The Hague on Wednesday that the strikes led to, quote, virtual obliteration of Iran's nuclear capabilities and set its atomic program back, quote, by decades. Hassan Abedini, the deputy political director of Iran's state broadcasters, said the 3 sites targeted by the U.S. had been evacuated a while ago, and that Iran, quote, didn't suffer a major blow because the materials had already been taken out, end quote. On Tuesday, sources familiar with the initial report into Saturday's bombings told the BBC U.S. news partner CBS that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium had not been eliminated. They added that the strikes had only set the country's nuclear program back by a few months, an assessment the White House swiftly described as, quote, flat out wrong, end quote. Now, Ray's longer-term thoughts and opinions. So, who is lying and who is telling the truth? The astrological themes of last week's bombing give us a clue. Jupiter, of exaggeration, was in a hard square aspect to Saturn, of the truth, and Neptune, fabrication of truth. Together they suggest statements of exaggeration and manipulation, propaganda. Thus, it is likely that neither side is telling the whole truth. The more important question is why? Why do world leaders think their populations cannot and should not be told the truth? The key probably lies with the nature of Saturn, control. If you tell the people, Pluto in Aquarius, the truth, they might revolt, Pluto, and leaders will lose control. What the leaders may not realize is that with Pluto in Aquarius over the next 2 decades, the people, Aquarius, will learn the truth. They will penetrate the veil of non-transparency and get to the source, and thereby increasingly gain more power. The Internet is too embedded in a worldwide communication network now to keep information from the people. A major task over the next 1 to 2 years will be discerning which information is fact and truth-based, Saturn, versus fabricated manipulation and propaganda, Neptune. Saturn and Neptune are conjunct now in the first degrees of Aries, hence the Aries vortex of 2025 and 2026. We introduced that this powerful geocosmic configuration was approaching over the past 2 years in our annual forecast books and in this column. We described it as, quote, the bottom of the abyss, where truth becomes a rare commodity, and the forces of fear and trust will be in conflict between the governments of the world that are driven by power and control, and their populations. It is the period representing the height of propaganda and division. Saturn of control is front-running or blocking out the light of Neptune, the urge for peace. But after February 20th, 2026, the last day of the exact aspect, Saturn will begin separating from Neptune, and transparency can begin to increase. It will take a while to notice, perhaps as long as 6 years, after Saturn conjoins Uranus and breaks up the last remnants of this age of terrorism that we have lived through for approximately 25 years. At that point, Saturn will be in its waxing or opening phase to all the planets outside of its orbit, for the first time since 2001. Think September 11th, 2001, when Saturn opposed Pluto and began its first waning phase to an outer planet thereafter. There is a geocosmic reason for maintaining hope for the future, so don't give up your vision for a world of beauty and peace. We are crossing an important cosmic milestone right now with the unfolding of the Aries vortex from 2025 to 2026. This is when the darkness, chaos, division, and manipulation of truth are at their peak. The pendulum is getting ready for its swing towards the opposite direction of this matter of quality of life on Earth. There will certainly continue to be dramatic events, but the arc denoted by the relationship of Saturn to the planets outside of its orbit is changing. It is opening up, whereas for the past 25 years, it was closing. Thus, as above, so below, we just need to negotiate reality intelligently as we experience these planetary dynamics operating in our lives. And for that, we need to value truth, not exaggeration, not lies, not propaganda designed to divide us. Saturn and Neptune in Aries, at the midpoint of Uranus and Pluto, which are in a harmonious trine aspect to one another, can coincide with a new frontier opening up for humankind. This is not only a period of war and economic threats, but also of a renaissance in our collective awareness and direction. The chaos of the events of today is the building block to this renaissance in awareness. So embrace the chaos and be alert for the openings it produces. According to our cycle studies, they are setting up for a remarkable long-term investment opportunity by the end of this decade. So wait for it, plan for it. That concludes this perhaps most important newsletter that's been done in quite a while. Thanks, Ray, and thank you for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I'll see you back on the Fun Astrology Podcast with Kristin all next week.